Good morning, everyone. We will begin our worship service with a prelude. You will all be muted as our music director, David Chapman, plays Mother Earth, Beloved Garden. Thank you, David. Welcome to virtual worship at Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church. I am Tricia Most, one of the 7 worship associates who plans services in collaboration with church staff. I'm happy you chose to be here in pursuit of spiritual renewal. If you are using Zoom this morning, please run your cursor around the perimeter of your screen to find the microphone icon and be sure to remain muted throughout the service so we can all hear the speakers and David's piano clearly. By moving your cursor around the edges of your screen, you may also find the option for switching between gallery view and speaker view. I believe you will want to choose speaker view, particularly during the photo essay parts of this service, so you can see the pictures well. Clicking on the bubble icon opens up the chat screen, where you can read timely messages during the service from our Assistant Church Administrator, Phil Brown. Right now, I invite you to type into chat how many people are viewing from your screen. Please type 1 if it's just you. Later in the service, you will be invited to use the chat feature to post your joys and sorrows. If you are new to worshiping here, please post your name and contact information in chat so we can contact you later, since we cannot greet you in physical space as we normally would after a worship service. You will have the option of joining a small chat group when the service is over by staying on Zoom. We are living in a difficult time when, for the sake of our health, we keep ourselves physically distant from each other. As we quarantine, we need spiritual renewal to help us stay grounded when it may feel as if we are suspended in a state of microgravity. Maintaining physical distance does not mean we keep ourselves distant from each other socially, because we need to connect with each other, sometimes for emotional support, and sometimes to have conversations that help us to consider all that we confront right now. The pandemic, economic recession, ongoing racism, and continuing climate crisis are all very pressing and overwhelming problems. Summer arrived with temperatures above 100 degrees in the Arctic Circle. Our nation is in turmoil in many ways, for many reasons, for more than 400 years worth of reasons. We need to think about how we can act on the values that are easier for us to claim when we are not feeling challenged by the evidence and reality that our nation's history does not reflect those values. We need determination to bolster ourselves for personal survival, as well as for moving our society toward the freedom and justice for everyone that has only ever existed in our idealized national fantasies. We are living in a difficult time, and we need to give and receive help from each other as we pursue spiritual renewal. Now we will go to the garden of Katherine Darlington, Leila Darlington Almallah, and Walter Darlington Almallah for the chalice lighting.
Good morning. We will now light our chalice, and we invite you to light yours at home if you have one. The words will be displayed on the screen. We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism. This is the church of the open mind, the helping hands, the loving heart, and the radiant spirit. Encendamos este cáliz para celebrar el unitarismo, universalismo. Esto es la iglesia de la mente abierta, de las manos amigas, del amor, del corazón y del espíritu radiante.
Now we will hear from our newest worship associate, Nori Mearden Ward.
Hello. If you've ever traveled in an you're okay. If you've ever traveled in an airplane before, the whole COVID-19 thing, you're probably familiar with the pre-flight spiel. I'm going to draw attention to a certain part of this spiel. Should the cabin lose pressure, oxygen masks will drop from the overhead area. Please place the mask over your own mouth and nose before assisting others. I'm going to use this as a metaphor for self-care, which is very important. In the change to e-learning during this school year, I often found myself really stressed. My lessons, more often than not, were videos. The instructions I was given weren't always clear, and I couldn't just really ask my teacher. I had to put in a comment and wait for a response. That response usually took at least a day to get there. So when the stress got to me, I asked for a break, to walk, to meditate, to just get away so I could clear my head and come back calmer and ready to work. I found that by doing that, school was a bit easier to do. I got this little piece of self-care from my parents. When they get overwhelmed, they call a timeout, walk away. 3 minutes later, they come back, ready to face whatever problem had them overwhelmed in the first place. Now, stress can be a bit more of a problem for people with anxiety disorders. I happen to fall into this category. And because of this, I've had to learn some tips and tricks for managing my anxiety. The most important one being, anxiety is not always a bad thing. Crazy, right? Nope. Yeah, sure, too much is a problem, as is too little. So the trick is to find your happy middle ground. Please note that my happy middle ground is different from, say, my little sister's. So what might work for you might not work for me, and vice versa. My advice for helping to cope with anxiety is to find your happy middle ground and learn more about your anxiety so you know what to do. It's the equivalent of putting my own mask on first. And now, Ms. Tricia Most with the Chalice Reflection.
Thank you, Nori. I am so happy to welcome you as our new Youth Worship Associate. When I was in graduate school studying marriage and family therapy, I learned about programs for people recovering from traumatic depression that got them engaged in the care of animals, horses, for example. Caring for others is actually considered an antidote for depression. That's because when we are depressed, we are focused on ourselves and our situation, which is entirely appropriate sometimes. For example, a natural and appropriate part of grieving may involve withdrawing, trying to make sense of what has happened, pausing to remember, taking time for contemplation before resuming all the busyness of life as usual. The process of remembering can sometimes be done with others, and sharing and connecting may help us feel a little bit more ready to face life challenges. So what about this idea that an antidote for depression is concern and caring for others? We are really talking about empathy, the ability to understand and care about another's experiences. I think it's significant that empathy is associated with cooperation and an investment in justice. And it turns out that empathy and courage are like muscles that have to be exercised or they atrophy. There are too many examples in American history and in the present, too many examples of privileged, high-status people without empathy who dehumanize others to spare themselves from feeling guilty when they exploit people for personal gain. We fail to acknowledge all of our nation's history when we recite and choose to think of this as the land of liberty, freedom, and justice for all. During General Assembly last week, my attention was drawn to the perspective of Indigenous people who were dehumanized, exploited, and annihilated by settlers and colonists. By dehumanizing victims, there's no guilt, and the injustice continues. We find ourselves in a time of reckoning. Finally, some of us, more of us, are turning our attention to long existing injustices, injustices practiced on this continent since white people arrived here and claimed to have discovered the land that was already home to people who lived here for millennia. There have been so many deaths, so much police brutality, including public executions of people of color by those paid to protect and serve our communities. This is not new. Cell phone video cameras are relatively new, but George Floyd's death was certainly not the first widely publicized, widely viewed public murder by police. The pandemic has certainly demonstrated the long-standing unfair disparities in healthcare quality and accessibility for people of color. Has the pandemic provided greater freedom from the distractions that normally allow us to move on to other interests instead of staying focused on the horror of injustice? I heard someone say the veils have been lifted and we see the holes in our society. Will this Will this movement be different? Or will we yet again shift our focus and allow our awareness to fade? This week, I heard about a Black country music star named Mickey Guyton, who recently released a single whose lyrics include the words, "If you think we live in the land of the free, you should try to be Black like me." It's a song that inspires empathy, I think, and empathy can be a good healing energy. We need our leaders. We desperately need our leaders to act courageously with empathy, to cooperate, and to focus on developing real justice. In response to this pandemic, the economic recession, the ongoing police brutality, and the growing climate crisis, we may understandably feel overwhelmed. I suggest we take time to pause occasionally, to seek renewal, to try to make sense of what has happened before resuming all of the busyness of life as usual. Nori reminds us that we need to keep on our own oxygen masks. It's the only way we can manage to be of use to others. And I would add, to be of use to our society. We need to find the place where we are in balance, where we can renew our spirits, feel healthy, and ready to face challenges. Someone said, think of a time when you felt the most expansive, the most limitless.
Markedly thinner, good.
Somebody needs to mute, excuse me, somebody needs to mute. Think of a time when you felt the most expansive, the most limitless, and the most at peace. Chances are you were in nature. We need nature, and we need renewal, and we need each other. We need to gather in spirit, even when we cannot gather physically, to share our hearts and minds, to nurture our spirits, to nurture each other in love, to gather in hope, compassion, and strength. David is going to play the familiar hymn, Gather the Spirit by Jim Scott. Philip Brown will post the lyrics for us. Please stay muted so we can clearly hear the piano, but feel free to sing out loud and proud. No one will hear you. So now we will hear Mary Massey talk about resilience.
Thank you, Tricia. Can you show the first slide, please?
Just a moment. I need to share screen, which I'm trying to do. Can you see it now?
No, not yet.
Okay. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Can you see it yet?
There you go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. After having 2 dogs put to sleep, my husband and I decided not to adopt another dog. To get my dog Fix, I volunteered at the Washington Animal Rescue League. 9 months later, a scrawny little dog arrived and I took her out for a potty break. She raced across the yard, put her paws up on the fence, looked around, then ran back and jumped into my lap. That energetic, curious, affectionate, but undernourished dog won my heart. Her 7-pound self and my foot are in this photo I took that day. Please notice her tail. We adopted Gigi. She gained 3 pounds, and the hair on her tail more than doubled in length. As this picture shows, we're waiting for the next slide.
Which is not advancing for some reason.
Try clicking your mouse once or twice.
I've done it.
So look at the tail while we're waiting, and you'll be surprised when you see the next picture.
Which for some reason is not advancing. I'm pressing the button very hard and it's not happening.
Have you tried the arrow keys?
Yes.
Try an arrow key right here on the side.
What do you mean?
There might be an arrow on the side.
Try the lower left corner. There should be a couple arrows.
I keep pressing it and nothing. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
Whoops.
That's not the wrong one. Yeah, okay.
There we go. There we go. She was no longer scrawny. She was beautiful. Look at that tail. Gigi is a long-haired Chihuahua mix, about 12 years old now, well-behaved and amazingly resilient. She's done so well through at least 3 major traumas. She's been good company since my husband died, and we moved from a house to Riderwood. She has some arthritis now, so we take short walks and longer stroller walks. This photo is of her and me. Gigi's at least one good reason to get up each morning, especially during the pandemic lockdown, and she certainly helps keep me resilient.
guess I'm up.
Andy,
Good morning. This is the scene outside our dining room door every morning. There are no indoor pets here, but we are lucky enough to live in the woods, which are full of resident creatures. Our woods are also part, slides aren't, there we go. Our woods are also part of a larger green highway traveled by lots of animals passing through, frequently stopping to shelter under our deck. Raccoons, foxes, deer, possums, and recently, a baby groundhog are regulars. We have bluebirds, while dozens of other bird species also share our woods. And chickadees nest in a box outside our kitchen window every spring. The green pathway through our neighborhood is pretty settled and secure, but the undeveloped land and habitat on either end of that greenway continues to disappear. So the wild things are more and more forced to be part of our suburban neighborhood. We have quite a few of these guys. There's also a great show going on in the woods, so we spend hours in our hammock chairs, watching it all and pitching peanuts to the chipmunks and blue jays who rule over the place. It's hard to imagine a more entertaining and restorative place for self-quarantine. So lucky. And now Mary Rooker.
Thank you, Andy. I've been studying how native plants nurture entire ecosystems, and I've discovered that they also nurture me. Nearly 10 years ago, I hired special landscapers. I wanted to convert my typical, mostly grass lawn to a miniature food forest for environmental reasons, and to manage excess yard water from the spring under my house. This picture shows most of the backyard soon after it was first planted in 2011. To be healthy, a food forest generally needs at least 7 levels or layers: tall canopy trees, shorter trees, shrubs, perennial plants, ground covers, underground root crops, and vines or climbers. A food forest brings in a variety of plants, native plants, shrubs, and trees, and these attract insects. Those insects then attract birds and other critters who eat the insects, and so on. The resulting biodiversity can become a whole functioning ecosystem if it's large enough. Now, mind you, this scene you're looking at was all grass, and this was the first planting in 2011. This is the picture today, and this is only about 1/4 of my backyard mini food forest today. This picture is a small part of the lovely view from the roof of my 1-story house. Even in this one section, you can see some of those 7 layers filling in nicely, and the rest of the yard looks similarly lush. My food forest is designed to provide food and habitat and more for lots of creatures, not just me. Edibles I share with wildlife include blueberries, elderberries, serviceberries, plums, and pawpaw. The fiddlehead ferns are also edible. Healthy insect populations have mostly come back to the land and soil. Landscapers are impressed at the variety of beneficial insects in my yard. The lightning bugs are amazing. This time of year, my backyard is full at night and has at least 3 dozen firefly flashes going nonstop. It looks like one large Christmas tree. Some evenings, I climb up on the roof to get a better view. My neighbors' conventional yards have a few lightning bugs, if any, nothing like my yard. And my yard didn't get very many lightning bugs either, until the food forest was a few years old. When my yard was all grass, I had several bird feeders. As soon as the native plants came, I saw many more birds and a greater variety. I never bothered to put the feeders back up. I see birds I've never seen in my neighborhood, like the hummingbird couple that now returns every summer when the bee balm plants get their bright red flowers in June. Now, the biggest threat to this young, small food forest is non-native invasive plants. Non-natives outcompete native plants and usually destroy them and biodiversity and ecosystems. They unravel the whole interdependent web of existence. I have to intervene to stop the non-native invasives. The landscaper experts tell me that. And I have learned from experience that, you know what, they're right about that. My front and side yards have a little bit of grass that I can easily handle with an old-fashioned quiet push mower like my grandparents used. No gas or electricity needed. The rest is all plants, as you see, so the weeding is a massive undertaking. I've always left it to expensive landscaping workers who specialize in native plants. Two things stopped me from trying to do the weeding myself. One, I felt overwhelmed by the huge amount of work required. And two, I felt incompetent because I don't know all those plants. The landscapers have been expensive, and I've never had the money to pay them to do the job fully. Because of COVID-19, my regular landscaper wasn't willing to bring in any workers to weed my yard this spring. So I have had to take on all the work myself. Yikes. Now, over the years, I have slowly learned some of the plants, but I had to quickly learn to identify more of the many plants in my yard to know which ones to pull before they flowered. I figured I'd first try to identify the non-native invasives and do what I could, weeding only the ones I knew for sure. I started with the front yard, and then the sides, and then the back. Two native plants were particularly distressed. One shrub on the side yard had been overgrown by morning glory and porcelain berry and English ivy. And by the time I removed all those invasive vines, what was left underneath it all looked pathetic and miserable. The branches showed clearly because the leaves were few and far between and small. The shrub recovered slowly at first. 8 weeks later, that sickly shrub looks vibrant and healthy. As you can see, even lush and out of control, about 4 times the size it had been. The second plant in distress was the native honeysuckle, which had grown to cover an area 8 feet by 8 feet. But this year, they looked sickly. The leaves were discolored and misshapen, and very few flowers came. The landscaper, in a brief outdoor consultation, said it was a severe infestation of some honeysuckle eating bug I can't remember the name of. The bugs were so tiny, I couldn't see them until I examined the leaves closely. I couldn't hate the bugs. They were just trying to survive, to find a meal. I only wished I had enough creatures who liked to eat those bugs to curb their damage. I had been planning to cut back the honeysuckle anyway, and the landscaper agreed that, this would be a good time to do so. To get rid of the bugs naturally, though, you have to get rid of all the leaves and cut the branches and main stems nearly to the ground. When I was done, all that was left of my 8-foot by 8-foot honeysuckle were a few completely bare sticks poking out of the ground. The new leaves in this picture just emerged since the pruning a month ago. As you can see, they look perfect and happy, no bugs. I wanted some way to keep the honeysuckle, so I clipped the damaged leaves off of the older, longer vines that I had already cut and wove them into this lovely basket. The handle is cattail reed, also from my yard. You know, I've always resented the non-native invasives, but I quickly gained a newfound respect for them from the intimate process of touching them, appreciating their unique root patterns and ways of spreading, and their ability to return despite our best efforts. After 2 months and 120 hours of work, I was done with the invasive plants I could identify. The yard looked transformed, even better than what the landscapers workers had been able to do in the past with my limited funds. I was amazed at how much I'd been able to do. I surprised the landscaper, but more importantly, I surprised myself too. Now I feel much more connected to the yard and to the other beings, plant, animal, insect, who live on it with me. I also feel more strongly connected to the interdependent web of existence and see it in action right before my eyes. My doing the yard by myself has also transformed my self-image, as I learned I could do something that I was certain I could not do. An unpleasant chore I had resented at first became a gift I enjoy and find meaningful. Also, COVID-19 had me anxious. Being in the garden saved me by alleviating my anxiety. It also provided important lessons in our current top challenges: the climate emergency and the 6th mass extinction, COVID-19, and racism. I can't take needed healthy action if I let myself feel overwhelmed or incompetent, whether in my yard or on those issues. And if I don't act, these problems march on and usually get worse. Intervention is required, and I have to get in there where I don't want to go, where it's tangled and dark. A simple mowing of the weeds won't work. I need to dig deep and deal with the roots. And the call to act is urgent. If I don't remove the invasives soon enough, some plants die before I get to them. They don't get that happy, miraculous ending of these two. The work I dread and think will be awful may turn out to be empowering and delightful. I can do more than I think I can. Maybe even create something beautiful. My yard has lots of great teachers. And now we'll hear Erika Teal's story. Are you there, Erika?
Erika, you need to unmute. That's good.
Yeah, now I can't get back to where I was. Here we go. Is that better?
We're not seeing your share screen.
I know. and I don't know how to do it, but that's okay. You'll just see my pictures. Do I have to start from scratch? Did you hear what I said before?
We didn't hear anything. Start from the beginning, please.
Okay. I live at Riderwood, and I love living here. I have no pets because I like to travel, and I do not want to subject them to staying in shelters or in kennels. I like to watch animals in their natural surroundings, and we have enough wildlife here at Riderwood to satisfy my need for contact with animals. And I do not have to take care of them. Last year, Riderwood received certification as wildlife habitat by the National Wildlife Federation. And that means that there are enough food sources for wildlife and the animals have access to water and shelter with places to raise their young. With our woods encircling the premises of our property and with abundant fruit and nut trees and berry bushes, the 3 ponds and the grass areas, the animals are happy to make this their home and raise their families. The 2 certificate signs from the National Wildlife Federation are mounted near our 2 entrance gatehouses. The National Wildlife Federation does not only certify organizations, they actually encourage family homes to apply. And if you Google their website, you can learn how to do it. Our wildlife is quite abundant. Much of it concentrates around the water because we have the lakes. 2 of our ponds are accessible to residents with walkways circling around them and adjacent wooded areas. I love walking there because it never fails that I can observe some animals. The permanent residents are the beautiful mallard ducks. They also use our walkways, and they actually think that they own them. When duck visitors come to the pond, the mallards watch them carefully because they consider it a threat to their territory. It happens when the merganser come through and stay a few days on their way home from their winter stay in the south. The mallards mate for life and present us with ducklings every spring. With luck, a few survive. We have crows and hawks and snakes that like just that size of a meal, unfortunately, or, well, they have to eat too. Excuse me. Our goose families fare a little better. And I think it's because parents are bigger and quite aggressive when it comes to their young. Once the gooselings make it to young adults, in this picture, they look almost like adults, but they're only teenagers. But at that age, they're out of the woods. The ducks are not the only ones that use our walks. On rare occasions, one can see the great blue heron walking along, looking for a place to get to the pond. Now, he found an entrance without having to fly, because they mostly hang around the water's edge and wait for a meal to swim by. Their eyesight is excellent. He saw something in the water, and he's getting ready to attack, neck stretched out and waiting. He attacks. And he missed. It got away. He's ready to wait for the next victim. But a person standing on the walkway behind him, and you can see the mirror image, is disturbing him. Herons are very shy and respond to the slightest disturbance. So he flies off. As you can tell, I love to watch them. Excuse me. It is so interesting that their neck practically disappears when they're resting. And as soon as they see something of interest, mostly food, their neck stretches out and they are on full alert. Okay, besides the great, we also have the green heron. They are much smaller than the great blues. They're about the size of a large crow or a duck, but not quite as plump. I don't know why they're called green heron, because I don't see the green. Their legs are long for wading, and they do have the typical heron look. Now the black-crowned night heron seems to be a temporary visitor. He shows up in the spring on his way to his breeding ground. He's very elusive and difficult. You can tell, you can barely see. You really have to look out for him. The last of the birds that live at the edge of the water are the red-winged blackbirds. With a sharp warning call, they defend their territory. And I remember a trip to Toronto when we were walking in between some hedges by the water. Blackbirds were doing their usual warning calls, ignored, because they do it all the time. Suddenly, one of them flew right over my head and pecked me, gentle enough so it didn't hurt. Yet he told me in no uncertain terms to stay away from his nest, which was in the hedge. Another animal, but not a bird, living near the water or next to or in the water is the frog. When I walk around the pond in springtime, I hear the frogs. They are hard to spot because as soon as you come close, and maybe you can see him, he jumps into the water. Unlike the bullfrogs, our tree frogs actually spend their time in trees, as their name suggests. They come out at night in May and June and entertain us with their shrill mating calls that sounds like a person rolling their R's in different pitches. If you hear that, you know you have tree frogs. The answer by a possible mate follows within a few seconds. They're very small, as you can see in this picture. This one is sitting on my balcony chair. On occasion, they have paid me a visit on my second floor balcony. They have suction cups on their feet for climbing trees, or why not a brick wall? I think they're cute, but only in their own way. Certainly not to win a beauty contest. They're not jumpy like regular frogs. And this one waited until I went in the house to get my camera, and he was still there when I came back out and posed for it. And the tree frog made it up the pole into the birdhouse. We have many birdhouses on the premises. In spring, we clean them and then keep checking to see if we have attracted some inhabitants. And you can imagine my surprise when I opened this one to find not a nest, but a visiting tree frog. I left him, and the next day, he had apparently found his way back out again. And I think the only way he could was through that little hole that was made into the birdhouse for the birds to come in. I'm saying this because he was gone, and I assumed that he had left through that little hole, if nothing worse had happened. And I'm saying this because the tree frog was not the only visitor. We had in a birdhouse. House wren had taken possession of one of the houses and had a couple of babies. And when I opened the top one day to check on the babies, they were gone. And I met the stare of a garter snake instead. I think he was too full to move. He stayed 2 days, reappeared again. Well, they have to eat too. That had been one of the very few birdhouses that had been occupied. Usually we have birds checking them out, like you can see the swallow, but then they decide against it and they move on. In case of this picture, the sparrow took over and actually built a nest. We never saw any babies, and I'm afraid that possibly the same fate happened to them that happened to the wren. Okay, we have a token pair of foxes. They're very shy and seldom seen. A friend took this photo because I never had a camera when I saw one. And then, of course, we have two of probably the most common backyard wild animals. One is the deer, beautiful and graceful. Just don't plant any flowers or vegetables, because they come and graze the area, and they come in groups, usually not just one. And the common one is the cute rabbit. Most of us with an open backyard are familiar with them. Last but not least, there are the insects, larvae, and all the little critters, mostly ignored, but so important in the food chain and the whole ecosystem. I have no photos except this pollinator bee. We have a butterfly bed where this picture was taken, and it should be called a pollinator bed, because I have not seen butterflies here, but always see bees of all sizes. The main reason I mention this is to emphasize how important it is to plant native flowers like butterfly weed, like in this picture, and other milkweeds, blazing star, which wasn't blooming at the time I took this picture, Joe Pye weed, coneflower, and this is foxglove, which was the first one to bloom this year. And the coneflower is blooming now, and you can see the butterfly weed in the background. And then we have mist flower, which isn't blooming yet. It's the one in the middle. And Jupiter's beard. And those are mostly the ones in our limited size butterfly bed. Planting those will give color throughout the summer into the fall, and it's very attractive and showy. There are many more to choose from. Pollinators prefer them to fancy hybrids or imported plants, as Mary has already pointed out in the last slideshow. And we have to attract and nourish pollinators like butterflies, bees, even hummingbirds, because they are in decline. And you can see the last announcement in the in the continuum had a notice that Doug Tellamy is talking in a seminar. He's giving a webinar, and it's called Nature's Best Hope. Unfortunately, it was already full when I tried to register. So I've given you a glimpse of Riderwood's wildlife. Pay us a visit and see for yourself, and I guarantee you will see at least 2 or 3 of the animals I talked about. And Tricia will have a few words now.
Thank you, Erika. We renew our spirits in a variety of ways. Some of us by gardening, taking walks, watching wildlife, by getting some alone time, and some of us renew our spirits through music. Because our service is running a little long, we're going to skip the song, Come Sing a Song With Me, that I was going to have David play at this time. And we're going to move on to joys and sorrows. This week, we lost Lowell Owens, who devoted so much to our congregation over many decades in so many ways. We will think of him often and remember, among other things, his loving care of our grounds and his lessons about the importance of removing invasive plants so that native plants and wildlife can thrive on the ancestral grounds of the Piscataway people where our church now stands. Let us join our hearts and minds in a time of prayer and meditation. As we gather in community, we carry with us our pain and our joy. Sometimes sharing these joys and sorrows in community can help. You are now welcome to share your written joys and sorrows by typing them into the chat bar. During the intonation, we will hear David Chapman play The Lone Wild Bird by Dmitri Tiomkin, arranged by Cliff Harding. May we hold these joys and sorrows and one another in love and kindness as we strive to provide each other with a sense of comfort and strength, courage and hope as we face the challenges of this time. Inspired by our Unitarian Universalist principles, we strive to develop more responsible, just, loving, and inclusive ways of being together and living in this world. Our church depends upon the financial support of our members and friends. Please give as generously as you are able. This Sunday's offering can be received as indicated in the chat bar. You can make online donations through Breeze or by text, and you can still mail donations to the church office. David Chapman will now play The Last Snow Leopard by Spencer Brewer. Our speakers today had messages for us as we seek spiritual renewal in this difficult time. Take a break, meditate, walk, get away to clear your head, come back calmer and ready to work. Open your heart. There's always a great show going on in the woods. The work we dread may turn out to be empowering and delightful. Enjoy the abundant wildlife and have an open heart. Now David will play Fuente d'Amor, Spirit of Life by Carolyn McDade. Philip Brown will display the lyrics for us as we sing first in Spanish and then in English. Now it's time to extinguish the chalice. Katherine? Since we don't hear Katherine Darlington, I'll extinguish my chalice. And remind you that you can stay online for some socializing to enter a randomly assigned chat room.
We now invite you to extinguish your chalice, and please feel free to stay and enjoy coffee and conversation in the breakout rooms.